Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute honor to speak to you all today. My name is Aliraza Somji, and just before I begin, I would like to say, as a brief preamble, that I'm neither a student of physics, nor am I a student of mathematics. I am also not a philosopher, nor am I a scientist. Rather, I'm a first-year undergraduate dental student studying here at the University of Dundee. I say this because of the topic I've chosen to speak about today. I consider myself as a critical thinker, well, at least a developing one, where I like to examine our existence as human beings and approach it from a variety of angles, thinking from both within the box and outside of the box. Therefore, in my talk today, I would like to examine the question, does our existence beg for a divine creator? And I'd like to do this from a personal perspective, connecting it to both rational and logical examples. So the question arises, why has such a topic grabbed my attention? It's actually something that I've been thinking about a lot for the past few years, and I'm sure it's a thought that has crossed the majority of your minds as well. First and foremost, it's because of my need to question, my urge to get satisfactory answers. And that's why, in high school, while studying the International Baccalaureate curriculum, I used to enjoy going to the theory of knowledge classes, where we used to approach and discuss various knowledge-related questions from a variety of angles, known as ways of knowing. And this used to open my mind up, because there was no end to the questions raised in the specific areas of knowledge fields. And sometimes, this used to edge our comfort zones. But that was great, because it allowed us to expand our thinking. Furthermore, in my academic experience, I've realized that there are four sorts of questions that are usually always answered. But then there's a fifth one that's hardly ever answered. And even if it is, the answer never floats my boat. So allow me to explain this using a personal example. In the past year, in the dental course, we've studied a lot about human anatomy and physiology. We've studied a lot about how our bodies are made up and organized and all the systems in place. And it absolutely astonishes me how highly designed our bodies are. But is this enough to beg for a divine creator? Moreover, something else that really led me to appreciate a divine creator was when all of this anatomy theory work went into practical work. Twice a week for the past year, we used to go to the dissection room to carry out cadaver dissections, where we witnessed anatomy in the real sense. Everything from the lectures was manifested in the cadaver, and this is an experience that I will never forget because of the impact it left on me, and therefore I will always be forever grateful to our donors, who are practically our silent teachers. My point here is that my first-hand experience of how our bodies are made up and all the systems in place led me to appreciate that the prospect of a divine creator is indeed a very compelling one. So now allow me to recap the 5 questions that I was talking about before, that in my opinion there are 4 that are usually always answered, but then there's a 5th one that's hardly ever answered. And I'll explain this using an example. These 5 questions are absolutely pivotal to any knowledge issue, and they are the what, when, where, how, and the lonely why. So, using the cardiovascular system as an example, let us together answer these questions. The what is the cardiovascular system, consisting primarily of the heart, blood vessels, and obviously blood. The where is in our bodies. The how is through autonomic control, keeping our hearts beating and our blood flowing throughout our body. The when is every day and every moment, keeping us well and functioning. But the why is an interesting one. There are 2 layers to this why. The first, quite simply, is to keep us alive. But this is tied to another why. Why are all these systems keeping us alive? Why are all these systems in place, working in synchrony? To do what? To achieve what purpose? The answer is to give us life. And therefore, I've realized that the why question is usually avoided in secular education systems, and the answer given is quite plain. I remember asking a few friends and teachers of mine, is that why are we set out the way we are? As you know, I like to poke a lot of questions around. Why do we have all these systems working together? Why are we so complex? And a couple of times I got the answer, that's just the way it is. And knowing me, I was not satisfied with that answer. So I began to think on it more and approach the topic with rational inquiry. All these systems in and around us, the respiratory system, the nervous system, further than that, the enteric nervous system, the hematological system, even if you look outside, we look at the photosynthesis, rain formation, solar system, galaxies, and so on and so forth. Whether we look at it from a microscopic view or indeed a telescopic view, there's no end to what is around us. So I couldn't find it in me to accept the answer that all this is just the way it is, or just for play. This is something that I needed more of an answer to. So naturally, I began to think on the topic more and more. So the next question that comes up is, sorry, can't wait for my friends to make fun of me on that. So the next question that comes up is, where did we all come from? And it's a very, very important question. So allow me to trace the origin of life in a very, very simple way. Let's start with a functioning system in our body, any system for that matter. A system is made up of a number of organs. Organs are made up of tissues. Tissues are made up of cells. Now, we're down to the level of 80 trillion cells in our bodies. That's 1/8 and a whole lot of zeros. So the cell theory states that the cell is the smallest unit of life. Okay. It also states that all cells come from pre-existing cells. So if we take that notion and we rewind our life timeline, we eventually come to the beginning of all this, the beginning of the universe. So now the question that arises is, was this a creator-instigated phenomenon, or was it a creator-free event? Or is it that science in this field has fully described and explained the event, that it leaves no room for a divine creator? This is where the whole science versus creator conflict takes place, the famous atheism versus theism debate. But we need to ask ourselves the question, is there really a conflict? I personally don't think there is one. Why? Because one doesn't rule out the other. Please focus on this very delicate point. The ruling out simply comes from our perceived notion of the attributes of the creator, the personalities that we deem a creator must have, and the ones that we ascribe onto him is where the differences come in. But in essence, it's a two-sided coin. Either it's creator-instigated, or it's not. And that eventually comes down to personal choice, which can be in line with science. So now that I've talked about that, I would like to talk a bit about what stops us from thinking about a creator, and what the veils that stop us from thinking about a creator, and what allows us to think freely. I'll start with the former. I firmly believe that our lack of reflection and contemplation on our very existence can eventually lead to our inner downfall. There are two parts that can come under this umbrella. The first is our ego, and the second is taking life for granted. Our ego can be something very dangerous if it leads to excessive pride and superiority. If it comes to the point that we are just living life, if it comes to the point that we feel that nothing can surpass us, and that everything is in our hands, and that we are the top of everything, then this can act as a veil to self-reflection and contemplation. It leads to a buildup of negative qualities and the loss of positive ones. The second is taking life for granted. If we are just living for the sake of living without any real purpose or achievements or goals, then we are defeating the very purpose of our existence. Another veil is our negative perceived notion of the Creator. Many times we hear, well, if there is a Creator, then why is there so much suffering in the world? And this is something that I can relate to. I've lived and grown up in Tanzania my whole life. That's in East Africa. I've lived there my whole life, and I've seen poverty in and around me. But the question is, how does that make me feel? It makes me feel thankful. It teaches me a very important lesson. It teaches me not to take life for granted and to appreciate how precious it is. I've come to understand that there has to be wisdom behind everything. Another question we often hear is, well, if there is a Creator, then where is He? Yet the answer to this is also very simple. Using an analogy, if I, for example, go outside right now and stare at the sun, well, actually, no way, that wouldn't be possible. We're in Scotland, right? There's not a lot of sun here. But anywhere else, if I was to go outside and stare at the sun, would I be able to? Yeah, probably for like a second or two. But then the rays from the sun would hurt my eyes. So I ask myself the question, if I cannot bear to see the created, how do I expect to see the Creator? But then again, somebody can just turn around and say, well, duh, that's just the photons from the sun hitting your eyes, and that's why you can't see it for that long. Very well. But my point here is that to appreciate the existence of a Creator has to come from within, not physically through sight. Another example to show this very notion is the Higgs boson particle. It's believed to exist, but it hasn't been physically seen through sight. It's been detected, and to physicists, that's 100% confirmed. But to me, and the rest of the 99.9% of the population, we're simply relying on their word. So my point here is that it is possible to appreciate the existence of something through means other than physical sight. So now I'd like to talk about what allows us to think freely of a divine Creator. So a gateway to thinking about a Creator. The first prime example is ourselves. The second is our very surrounding. The fact that we are all human beings as opposed to human doings is a fascinating distinction. As human beings, we have consciousness, we have intellect, we have emotions, we have life within us, all which seem to point to be instinctively given gifts. As human beings, we are able to be in control of our lives with free will. Some might say we even have a soul. Others will say, well, that depends on your interpretation of what a soul is. Our very identity defines who we are. Take our appearance, for example. Over 7 billion people in the world, and we all have distinct fingerprints, diverse facial appearances, unique personal traits, and so on and so forth. Take our emotions, for example. Take sadness as a feeling that if we didn't feel, we wouldn't know the true value of happiness. Take our intellect, for example. How much we've developed from using simple tools to grand machines, from landing man on the moon, which was just yesterday, well, not that I was alive, but from landing man on the moon to landing a spacecraft on a comet. All these merit to making us fascinating human beings as opposed to human doings. As human doings, none of this would be possible. We would just be a collection of processes without any real purpose. The second example is our very precise environment that we live in. When we watch shows and documentaries like Planet Earth or Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, it's absolutely astonishing to see what is around us, the beautiful nature that is around us. It's absolutely, sometimes I really enjoy watching these shows. And therefore, sometimes, even out regularly, if you just see the sunrise or the sunset, sometimes it does ask the question, does all of this beg for a divine Creator? I want to conclude my talk today by emphasizing the point that life is a gift. And indeed, what a precious gift it is. It's so special and so unique that it took us 13.7 billion years to bring us this very moment. It took us 4.5 billion years to yield us, human beings. So at the end of the day, how we look upon our existence and whether or not it begs for a divine creator, eventually all comes down to personal choice. As a youth myself, I can already see the precious value life has, because before we know it, it can overtake us. What's the one thing in life that's so certain, yet so uncertain at the same time? Don't worry, it's not taxes. It's death. It's so certain in the fact that it happens to everyone, yet it's so uncertain in the fact that we don't know when it's going to happen. So if I'm alive tomorrow, I'll reflect on how I lived today. If I'm alive in the week to come, I'll reflect on how I lived in the week that went by. If I'm alive in the years to come, I'll reflect on how I lived in the years that went by, further reforming myself in order to make the best use of the gift that we all have, and that is the gift of life. Thank you very much for your attention.